Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Understanding ISO Training Requirements and Their Effect on Your Training Program. Before we begin, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, there are multiple application engagement tools that you can use. All the engagement tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any questions today during the webcast, you can submit those through the Q&A engagement tool. We will try and answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please do note we capture all questions. A copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are available in the related content tool. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we encourage using a high-speed and stable internet connection and closing any other programs or browser sessions running in the background that could cause issue. Strong Wi-Fi connections are acceptable if they are stable. Unstable Wi-Fi due to congestion or other items may result in connectivity drops. Webinars are bandwidth intensive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help you conserve that bandwidth. And the webcast is streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your computer speakers or your headset are turned on and the volume is up so you can hear us presenters. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than others, so logging off your VPN might be recommended. If your slides are pushing behind, you may try F5 on your keyboard to refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help Engagement tool at the bottom of your screen, if need be. And an on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately one day after the webinar here, and a link will be emailed out afterwards. With that, we will transition to what you all are here to kind of hear and talk about today. My name is Katie Grimm. I have been in the compliance and quality management solutions space for almost 6 years, and I'm a part of Ideagen, helping to oversee the quality, health, safety, and environmental solutions for Ideagen North America. I have with me today our main featured presenter, Melanie Ross. Melanie has over 20 years of experience in quality assurance, quality control, and quality management. She has worked in several different industries, including chemical, biological, oil and gas, and aerospace. Her main role in each of these industries was the development of management systems, including internal audit programs, vendor qualification procedures, and implementation of Lean Six Sigma. Currently, Melanie is a technical products developer for ANAB, designing and delivering training courses and supporting client outreach through business development activities. Her role serves as a technical resource to customers, assessors, and other interested parties. So we are very grateful to have Melanie today with us. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Melanie, to help us walk through the program.
Great, thanks, Katie. Thank you for the introduction. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right, well, thank you all for coming to this webinar today. I'm very excited to talk about ISO training requirements and how those requirements affect training program development, implementation, and maintenance of those programs. Again, thanks for joining us today. As Katie mentioned, we do have time at the end for Q&A. So please enter your questions into the Q&A box, and we will get through those at the end of the session. So why are we here today? During this webinar, we're going to look at ISO requirements for training and competence from a variety of ISO standards. These requirements will be looked at from a high level, comparing the common requirements across multiple ISO standards. Because surprisingly enough, the requirements are not that different from standard to standard, with only minor differences depending on the technical nature of the standard. We will look at ways to document training requirements on the front end before training even occurs, so that organizations know what training is needed for all personnel. We will also look at different types of training records and ways to organize those records. And finally, we'll talk about ongoing competence and training processes and requirements for ongoing training. It is important that organizations understand the intent of ISO requirements for training so that the training is a value-added process to the organization and not just a check-the-box exercise. Ensuring training and competence is developed, implemented, and maintained properly sets up organizations for success. So why is training important? Whether your organization is certified to a management system standard, such as ISO 9001, or accredited to a technical standard, such as ISO IEC 17025, training is an important part of ensuring personnel are competent to perform the activities and responsibilities assigned to them. Training is the intersection of knowledge, skills, and competence. Organizations hire personnel that have skills and abilities that match the positions they're filling. However, personnel also need to understand organizational requirements and relevant ISO requirements. These requirements are often not learned through formal education or experience at other organizations. Additionally, personnel must be informed and knowledgeable about any changes in technology or new processes that plan to be implemented. Training is crucial in developing the appropriate knowledge, skills, and competence personnel need for successful operations. So what do ISO standards do? I want to go over a little bit about what ISO standards are, what ISO is, before we move into the requirements for training, just to give you some background. So first and foremost, ISO is not an acronym. It's short for ISOs, which means equal. Now, why did ISO decide to use ISO instead of an acronym? Well, they're international standards. The standards work across the globe and in different languages. So if we used an acronym, it would be different in different languages. The other reason is ISO standards are meant to standardize or harmonize the way that businesses do their work. So using the term ISO makes sense. When we look at the mission of ISO, it's to promote the development of standardization and related activities in the world with a view to facilitating international exchange of goods and services, to improving the management of business processes, to supporting the dissemination of social and environmental best practices, and to developing cooperation in the spheres of intellectual, scientific, technological, and economic activity. ISO standards provide requirements for training and competence, but implementing these requirements effectively and efficiently is often the challenge, which is the goal of our webinar today. What do ISO standards do in general, though? Why do we use ISO standards? ISO standards are used most obviously in the development of standardization. Organizations from all backgrounds implement the same requirements, adhere to the same requirements. This facilitates the international exchange of goods and services by enhancing the confidence in the goods and services provided. ISO standards, when used correctly, improve the management of business processes. I'll use the term check the box, quote unquote, a few times today. If organizations only use the ISO standards as a check-the-box exercise to obtain a certificate, they are not getting the intended benefits of the standard. When implemented and maintained effectively and efficiently, ISO standards are a tool for organizations to improve their business processes through the variety of requirements outlined in the standard or standards. Most specifically to today's topic, training requirements. ISO standards also support the dissemination of social and environmental best practices. Here, we could think of ISO 14001 for environmental management system certification, or ISO 17029 for validation and verification bodies, along with many others. And finally, ISO standards develop cooperation in the spheres of intellectual, scientific, technological, and economic activities. ISO committees are comprised of individuals representing vast industries and countries sharing their knowledge to outline the best of the best practices by means of the ISO standards that are published. How can organizations document training requirements? What types of training records do organizations use or need to document training? How can these records be organized to prepare for internal audits and external audits or assessments? What is required for ongoing training or competence demonstration? All of these questions are answered in some degree by ISO standards, several of which are listed here. ISO 9001, for example, has requirements for training mainly in Clause 7.2, with requirements for competence, awareness, and communication. Similarly, ISO IEC 17025 for testing and calibration laboratories has requirements for training in Clause 6.2 for personnel. All of the standards listed here specify that organizations must determine the necessary competence of personnel, ensure that competence is achieved through experience, training, etc., and maintain records of competence and training, including ongoing training and competence monitoring. Here we see the commonalities of the requirements. These are not word for word from the standards, but are summarized to see that regardless of the standard implemented, requirements for training are very similar. Most of the ISO standards state something similar to what is on this slide, where organizations shall determine the knowledge necessary, the necessary competence. They must consider current knowledge and changing needs or trends, determine, define, and document the necessary competence, then take action to acquire that competence, and ensure competence to perform activities. They must have a documented procedure on how they're going to do all of these things, and then in the end, they must retain records. So what are the steps in the training process? They're outlined here. If you think back to the slide we were just on, it's basically the requirements of the standard put into steps. First, an organization determines the function or position, then determines the competence and training requirements necessary. Notice that I'm using the term function or position rather than individual. While some of the standards do say all personnel or each person, oftentimes it is more efficient to think on the level of function or position first to ensure that all relevant competence and training requirements are identified. Then, drill down to the individual when determining the types of training needed. Depending on individual education, training, experience, technical knowledge and skills, training may look different from one person to the next. One person may require hands-on training with a more senior person, while another may just need to read and understand the nuances of the procedures specific to your organization. As part of the training process, the organization must determine the types of training needed, then perform the training and authorization as applicable. Finally, training and competency records are generated. The cycle loops around for monitoring competence and any need for retraining as well. Once the function or position is determined, we then need to determine the competence and training requirements for that function or position. Target those activities that influence results and/or affect performance and effectiveness of the management system and operations. Ask, what does the function or position do within the management system? And what are the duties, responsibilities, and authorities of this function or position? This will allow you to define and refine what activities require training and competence evaluation, as well as start to shape what the training will look like. How does the function or position influence results or outputs of the management system? How does the function or position affect performance and effectiveness of the management system? Focusing on quality of operations, again, allows for those functions and associated activities to be spelled out in a manner that is logical and shapes the training program. The last question to ask is what competencies are necessary for this function or position. This will begin to define that monitoring of ongoing competence that is required, as well as begin to define the records that are needed to demonstrate that the training program is effective in allowing personnel to acquire the necessary competence and evaluating the effectiveness of any actions taken through the training program. Another question to ask that is not on this slide: what competence or training do you think you need? Ask this of the personnel in your organization. I mean, they're the ones performing the work, so they know where they are lacking in knowledge and skills, right? There are many tools already at our disposal to assist in documenting necessary competence and training requirements. Oftentimes, job descriptions have a section for this very topic, but I caution you to look at the processes performed in the management system and operation of the organization to ensure that nothing is missed. Sometimes there are gaps between job descriptions and day-to-day activities where training and competence is lacking. Some organizations create a matrix with all functions or positions along one side and all processes or procedures across the top. Then, the matrix is filled in for what functions or positions require competence in which process or procedure. This is one way to fill that gap between job description and actual activities. This is also where a document management system, such as Qualtrics, could be useful. Job descriptions can be linked to procedures and processes in Qualtrics, which can then be transformed into training plans. Training plans are a good way to document how competence and training will be performed, as well as form part of the training record if filled in with what types and dates of training were actually performed. Similarly, onboarding checklists can be used to not only determine competence and training requirements, but also document the activities that were performed as part of the training program. I caution you here, though, to ensure that if an onboarding checklist is going to be used as the documentation of competence and training, that it truly reflects the requirements of the standard and the training needed to ensure competence of personnel. I was in a lab where the onboarding checklist was dress code, ethics, safety procedures, etc., and had nothing to do with the competence the personnel needed to perform their activities in the laboratory. So this was a big gap in that laboratory. So with that said, and bringing up the term onboarding, is onboarding the same as orientation? Does onboarding develop technical skills? Does orientation do that? Again, just be aware that the traditional human resources orientation is not what the standards are talking about when they say organizations must document necessary competence, provide training, and monitor competence. Orientation can be a part of onboarding, but in your onboarding, you need to also ensure that you are covering those technical requirements in the processes and procedures that are being performed in your organization. There are many different types of training that can be used to acquire necessary competence. This graphic has a few of them, such as coaching or on-the-job training, teaching, such as getting an advanced degree or going to a trade school, learning through reading procedures, attending webinars such as this one, evaluation as in annual performance evaluations or maybe proficiency testing, and then knowledge, doing, experience, and skill. But when it comes to an organization, we need more concrete ways to provide training than these general terms here. That's where this list comes in. Organizations should use varying degrees or levels of training depending on what is needed to obtain the necessary competence for the function, position, and ultimately the person, keeping in mind the complexity of the process or procedure that is the subject of the training. Some different types of training are read and understand the procedure, observation of the process with hands-on performance, internal and external training, webinars, and conference talks. Regardless of the type of training, focus on developing employees for their current jobs, but also preparing them for future roles and responsibilities. Let's go over some of these on the list in more detail. How many of us have started a new job and been plunked down in a conference room or at a desk with a binder, hard copy or virtual, of documents to read before being allowed to begin work? I've had my fair share of that in my career. Reading and understanding an SOP, or standard operating procedure, is one of the most basic forms of training. While it is important to do so, it hardly provides any competence to the person reading it. Now, if the person has experience in the process or procedure and is merely reading to understand the nuances of how the process or procedure functions at your organization, that is one thing. But if the person has no experience in the process or procedure, reading and understanding the SOP does not cut it, so to speak. Observation and hands-on performance is one of the most common forms of competency development. This sometimes is called train the trainer. The person being trained observes the trainer perform the task or activity. Then the trainee performs the task or activity, and the trainer evaluates performance. As an aside, this also is a good way to catch, so to speak, if the written procedure matches the actual performance of the process. The image here is ongoing because it may not be a once and done. The trainee may need to observe numerous times, perform numerous times, and be evaluated numerous times. This is also a good way to introduce procedural changes, changes in technology or new processes, and is also a good way to evaluate competence and ongoing competence through the perform and evaluate steps. Group training is a way to train many people on the same task or activity. It is best suited for management system processes, organizational policies, ISO requirements, and procedural changes, and can be a way to introduce new technology or changes in technology as well. You may be thinking, why can't they just read and understand organizational policies or procedural changes, for example? Well, personnel can, but having a group training is a way to allow all personnel to ask questions, seek clarification, and standardize or harmonize the way the requirements or policies or procedures are interpreted. Group training teaches personnel about specific systems, processes, tools, and management system procedures that the organization utilizes in day-to-day operations. Utilizing group training is a great time management tool because many people are trained at once, which also may reduce the cost of the training. Again, it allows for that open discussion for individuals in the group to learn from each other through the interactive nature of group training, and allows for consistent application of the topic of the training. External training is another form of training that organizations use for personnel to acquire necessary competence. There are many different types of external trainings, such as training offered by training organizations, such as ANAB or ASQ, training provided by trade organizations, such as ASTM, and then from industry professionals. Universities or colleges obviously offer degree programs, but they also often offer certificate programs to supplement degrees or provide necessary competence in specific areas. Trade schools are another example, another external mechanism for training. Keep in mind, external training will most likely not be tailored to your individual organization's policies and objectives. So most often, external training requires additional internal discussion or additional training to apply the knowledge and skills obtained to your processes. Competency for external training is often demonstrated through examination and generation of a certificate by the organization providing the training. The certificate then serves as the training record. Webinars, such as this one, and conference talks are another peripheral way to provide training to personnel. Webinars and conferences supplement knowledge and skills obtained by other forms of training, such as observation and hands-on training and internal group training. The best way to document a webinar or conference as a training event is to use your training record. On the record, document what training was supplemented or addressed and what knowledge was gained. If competency needs to be demonstrated, document how that was accomplished. Competency demonstration for webinars and conference talks can be tricky since they are not necessarily formal training events. Competency demonstration could be a quiz of concepts addressed, a discussion with a supervisor or team lead, or even presenting the concepts learned to the department or to the team. Webinars and conference talks cannot be the only form of training, though. Again, they supplement other, more formal training events. Now that we've gone through some types of training, let's talk about types of training records. When it comes to training records, or any records for that matter, the records can be paper or electronic, or a combination of both. Document management systems, such as Qualtrics, can be used to store paper records as scanned copies, and electronic records, such as workflow results, or quizzes after reading and understanding a procedure, or a test used in conjunction with on-the-job training, for example. Regardless of the type of training record, ensure that the records document the necessary competence, the activities to acquire that competence, evaluation of the effectiveness of the training, and any ongoing competence as required. Whether paper or electronic, training records may be organized by function or position, or by person, or by the process or the competence needed. For the last one, think about group training. Everyone signs one training form. That training record is by process or competence. How will it then be used for the individual or function or position? It is up to your organization to determine how training records will be organized, and it may be a combination of all of these. So it is something to think about and plan for when developing or improving your training process so that the records are organized in a way to be easily retrievable and comprehensive in demonstrating the effectiveness of the training program. We've looked at the different types of training records, but what should go on the record? None of the ISO standards really say specifically what should go onto the record, only that appropriate documented information is retained as evidence of competence, selection, training, supervision, and authorization of personnel. This list here is not all-inclusive, but does contain the main information that training records should contain. The training topic is an important one. This will be used to quickly identify the competence that is being addressed. Is the training topic the title of a procedure, the name of a process, an activity? Having an objective is always a good idea as well, and is often left off of training records. Document what the point of the training was, such as this training provides trainees with the necessary competence to perform activity X. Obviously, the trainee or trainee's name should be included along with the date of training. Some training takes time to finish, like on-the-job training, so consider documenting the training period or start and end dates in this type of situation. The trainer should sign the training record as evidence of completion of the training, and there should be some sort of competence evaluation, whether that is just sign-off by the trainer, completion of exercises, or a quiz or exam. It's also good practice to document the date retraining is required if applicable. This should be captured in the training system as well so that the retraining is completed as needed. And then, specifically for technical standards like ISO IEC 17025, an authorization statement should be included somewhere in the training record, indicating who is authorized to perform what activities. What other items do you include on your training records? Is it the same for each type of training, or does it vary depending on if it's group training or individual training, for example? I mentioned competence evaluations on the last slide, but what are they specifically? Again, competence evaluations can be as simple as signature confirming understanding. Here, we are talking about signature of the trainer. Information is presented or read, and the trainee says they understand it, so the trainer signs off. This is okay for some things, like reading and understanding a policy, but for others, this really lacks the rigor that is needed to truly demonstrate competence was achieved. A step up from signature is review of records. This would be the records generated by the trainee when performing the task or activity. The trainer or supervisor reviews the records generated to see if they comply with the requirements of the process or procedure. If they do, then competence is assumed. Test administration goes one step further, where the trainee takes a test to demonstrate understanding of the topic at hand. Be careful here, though, to ensure the test asks questions related to the necessary competence the training intended to employ. Observation by the trainer is similar to review of records. The trainer observes the trainee performing the task or activity and verifies that competence was demonstrated. This is similar to external audits or assessments, where the certification body or accreditation body observes the organization's personnel performing tasks and activities to determine if they are competent. These are just a few ways to evaluate competence. There are many others that can be used as well. This is another area in training where a document management system such as Qualtrics could be leveraged to evaluate competence through the use of workflows, quizzes, and escalating sign-offs. This puts all of the evaluations in one place, which speaks to what we are going to look at next. Training records need to be organized. I mentioned before, the records can be a mix of hard copy and electronic and can be stored in many different places. Some records may be in human resources, some may be in a laboratory information management system. Some paper copies may be in file cabinets. Regardless of where or how they are stored, training records must be organized. It's so important that I said it twice. Training records must be kept up to date and easily accessible. It is important to know where the training records are so they can be reviewed or viewed whenever needed. The records need to have evidence of competence and, where applicable, evidence of authorization. Again, using a document management system can assist in organizing the training records. Once training has been completed and recorded, now it is time to consider ongoing competence. What does that look like for your organization? Is it the same for every process, every procedure, or are there levels or types that are used in different situations? Is it in the form of retraining, or is it additional training that's needed? Is it a part of personnel development plans overall, or part of improvement plans for personnel? Is it related to improved technology or process improvements? You want to consider how ongoing competence can be used in career development as well. Remember, having a management system is not just a check-the-box exercise. It is a tool for your organization to use to run the business, improve operations, retain personnel, and enhance performance. So keep that in mind when developing your training program and considering what ongoing competence will look like. Consider how ongoing competence will be documented as well. Is it a part of the training records? Is it considered records generated from performing work? Or is it a combination of these two? While ongoing competence is not specifically in ISO 9001, it is important for organizations to ensure personnel remain competent and that actions are taken to acquire necessary competence as needed. So here are some tips on implementing the requirements of ISO standards, regardless of what standard applies to your organization. First and foremost, ensure that the organization is meeting all of the shalls in the standard or standards. Shalls are requirements and must be implemented. Now, with that said, again, ISO requirements should not just be a check-the-box exercise. Organizations need to use ISO standards as a means to an end. That end is a robust management system that supports organizational objectives and ultimately promotes the success of the business. document, and implement processes to meet the shalls that actually work and fit in with the culture and day-to-day operations of the organization. Once implemented, someone needs to make sure that the process is effective. Are personnel adequately trained? Do personnel demonstrate competence to perform activities that they are authorized to perform? If the answer to those questions is no, then the process isn't effective and needs to be reworked. Once the process is effective, then documented information needs to be retained in the form of training and competence records. Some ISO standards, such as ISO IEC 17025, specify the records that must be retained that goes beyond just training records, such as records for selection of personnel, supervision of personnel, and monitoring competence, for example. Ensure that your organization fully understands the requirements and how they relate to the organization's objectives and overall operations. When executed effectively, training gives personnel the tools and knowledge to support the organization's objectives. Training ensures consistent application of procedures and policies, which reduces rework and non-conforming work. Training enhances the confidence in the competence of personnel, ensuring that they have the knowledge and skills to perform the activities assigned to them. Remember, training also monitors for ongoing competence. As part of a training program, the organization must ask, is additional training needed? Are new technologies or new processes being brought in-house that require additional training? Again, training is not a one-and-done activity, but rather a culture in the organization to ensure that personnel obtain and retain the necessary competence to perform their work. For many technical ISO standards, such as 17025, training also authorizes personnel to perform assigned activities. This authorization is important, not just because the standard requires it, but also because it empowers personnel to understand and know what activities they are responsible for and authorized to perform. On the other hand, here, training records are just as important as the training itself. The records provide evidence of the effectiveness of the training program, as well as the training that has occurred. These records can guide personnel development when compared to the training requirements. What's missing? What training has not been performed or could be performed in a different manner? And finally, the records contribute to the overall effectiveness of the management system. Before I hand it back over to Katie to go over our Q&A, I just want to leave you with some additional resources that ANAB has to offer. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, there are free webcasts on a variety of topics. These webcasts are 5 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and can be viewed at any time. ANAB also has a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standards, requirements, and other topics. We also have ongoing webinars monthly. We are planning our 2023 schedule right now, so stay tuned to find out what other webinars we will be putting on, and we are planning a couple more with Ideagen and Qualtrics in 2023 as well. And finally, ANAB offers training in many areas, including internal auditing, standards, risk, and other topics. As with assessments, training changed significantly with the pandemic and travel restrictions. All of our traditional in-person courses were converted to online versions and include exercises and discussions related to the topic at hand. We also offer web-based self-paced training. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. Now let's get to the fun part, your questions.
Wonderful.
Okay, I have our contact information up here, which you will have in your handout that you were provided, and you'll also get that in an email with the recording of the presentation, and then I will turn it over to you, Katie, for Q&A. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem at all. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for showing this contact information. If you're also looking for additional contact information, I believe it can be found in the bio section, as well as will be in the follow-up email that comes along with the recording of the presentation as well. But jot this down if you're looking to contact ANAB or Melanie. So big thank you to Melanie for working with us today and putting on this great presentation. We do have a few questions that have come through, so I will transition over in just a second to those. Before I do that, I do just want to highlight the organization that I'm a part of. We are Ideagen. Ideagen is the global and parent company for the QMS solution Qualtrics that Melanie did mention. I worked with Qualtrics for about 6 years now, and again, we've worked with ANAB for quite a long time. So if anyone does have questions on QMS solutions or other products that tie to the heavily regulated industries or ISO themselves and managing your training records or document control or any of those quality processes, please feel free to reach out to us. We would be more than happy to do a one-on-one presentation for anyone or share a little bit more about what we do. Ideagen, though, is more than just QMS solutions. We are a software organization and has multiple product lines under the highly regulated industry spaces like aviation, financial services, life sciences, healthcare, and manufacturing, and we operate globally. So Melanie and myself are based in the US, but Ideagen is headquartered out of the UK, as well as has, again, offices all over the world. So with that, I will actually flip back to the Q&A slide so you can see Melanie's beautiful face while we go through this. Let me start, Melanie, with the first question that we got. It is, you mentioned onboarding and orientation. Could you elaborate on the difference in those two terms?
Yes, absolutely. So I often see these terms intermingled when we are talking about laboratories. That's really my main expertise is laboratories, where human resources will set up a process to bring a new person into the organization, and they're thinking more of, welcoming them to the organization, showing them around, where's their desk, where can they get supplies, that sort of thing, and that is orientation. So that is maybe a day, you come in, you meet new people, you meet your teammates, that sort of thing. When we look at onboarding, there's two different types in my mind, and this is my mind, Melanie's mind on onboarding. There is the HR onboarding, where you're talking about how to do your timesheet, how to ask for time off, that sort of thing, but then it needs to go that step further where you're onboarding them into their role, their technical role within the organization. What are the tasks and activities they're going to be performing, and what competencies do they need to perform those? So orientation is typically a piece of onboarding. We just want to make sure that onboarding also includes those technical activities as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question that came through is, what type of external training counts as training?
Any. Is that a good enough answer? Any external training. So if it relates to the activities that the organization is performing, then it would quote unquote count. The word count is interesting, but the more training that you can give to your people, to your personnel, the better. The more empowered they are, the more knowledgeable they are, the more they understand their skills and their skill set, the better they're going to do for your organization, the better work they're going to do for your organization, and that just makes the organization succeed. The key is with the external training, again, is that it's not necessarily going to be tailored to your policies and procedures. So oftentimes we'll see you send someone out to get external training and they come back empowered with this knowledge and these skills that may be different than the way you do your work. So you have to be sure that that is then tailored into the policies, procedures, processes that your organization performs.
Wonderful. I will field this one. There was a question, where does QPulse fit under the Ideagen umbrella? QPulse is another QMS or quality management solution within Ideagen. So just similar to Qualtrics, there's QPulse as well. If you're interested in that product as well, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to get you in touch with someone. ANAB just happens to use the Qualtrics product, but QPulse is another QMS offering that Ideagen offers. Melanie, back to you on this one. We use paper-based records which have the disadvantage that they can go missing. Do you have experience of an effective electronic alternative? or an effect?
Yes, that is one of the risks. You know, now in our ISO standards, we talk about risks and opportunities. That is one of the risks of having paper standards, is that they can, or paper records, is that they can disappear. They can get misplaced, they could get damaged. So, I mean, the simplest of simple is scanning them, right? We all have copiers that have scanning technologies. Our phones can be scanners now, is to scan that paper record so you have that electronic copy. The other alternative is to implement a document management system like Qualtrics, and I've never heard of QPulse before, but you know, to have that system where you set up workflows that then generate those records for you. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but paper records really are a huge risk to organizations. I mean, not just training records. When you think of paper records for manufacturing or testing or calibrations, those could get damaged and disappear as well. And then also, that's where that training matrix could come in too. So you may have misplaced the paper record, but in your training matrix, you have the date the training was completed. So it's not as good and probably would result in like an opportunity for improvement in an auditor assessment. But having multiple ways that you document this with the training is also another way to mitigate that risk.
Awesome. And yes, David, and that's David who asked the question, if you're interested in learning more about one of those QMS solutions, feel free, again, my contact information will be sent out in the follow-up email. I'd be more than happy to chat with you a little bit more about an electronic alternative with a QMS solution or document control system like Qualtrics or QPulse. Another question that came in, if you are a small organization looking to get ISO 9001 certified, how do you implement such training, and how far in advance of the certification application? Also, most of my colleagues are non-technical, and the tasks are non-technical audit operation based.
So I want to address the second part of your question of how far in advance of the certification application, and just go back to my check the box comment that this is not a check the box exercise. So really, organizations should think about training not as how do I comply with the ISO standard requirements, but training as how does that benefit my organization? How does having competent, trained personnel make my business run better, right? So yes, you do have to document training and have your training records and document competence and all that as a requirement of 9001, but it's a good business practice as well. So to implement the training, if you're a small organization, I say keep it simple. Look at your processes, look at your management system. What processes are critical? So you say non-technical, so I could put in there instead of technical, critical. So what are the critical processes, and think about it from a risk perspective again. If something went wrong, how would that impact your business, and what training needs to be in place to prevent that from going wrong? So if you're non-technical audits, like if you're going to be 9001 to be an auditing organization, then you would want to look at how are they competent to generate audit plans? Are they competent to define audit criteria? Are they competent to perform the audit? Those are the things that you would think about. So in your situation, you could replace technical, thinking of technical like testing or calibration, with critical, with the word critical.
Wonderful. I believe we have one more that has come through. When you have a lab that has been in operation for a long time, what is the best way to document someone that is the designated trainer due to experience or time, but may not have a clearly documentable training activity?
Yes, that is always a challenge, and that's a really great question. In one of my previous positions, we had an individual that actually created and patented the process that we were performing. And we had an auditor say, well, where's his training record on that? And he literally created the process that other organizations were doing. His name was on it. So that's always a challenge because the standard says you shall document it, right? So one of the things that you could use here, I don't like using the term grandfathering, but you could use that training matrix. So you have that training matrix that says this person is the trainer, they have this many years of experience, and then in your training procedure, you say, if you records this far past are no longer in existence, because you have a record control policy for retention as well, right? So you wouldn't be expected to have records from 10, 15, 20 years ago when that person was trained. It's based on their experience and their expertise. And you could document that again in a training matrix or in their training file as just a training record that just says this person is the trainer for this process.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll do one last one, and then if there's any other questions, please get them in. We will kind of wait an extra minute. But is it okay to have training records stored in multiple locations, like the laboratory, supervisor's office, and HR?
That is very typical, especially of paper records. And a blend of paper and electronic. It is very typical to have records in a variety of different places. So you think about in 17025, you'll have impartiality agreements and confidentiality agreements, and usually that's something HR or human resources handles. Then you'll have laboratory related, then you'll have quality related. If you're going to have records in multiple locations, just make sure that it's defined what record is going to be where, so that you can easily pull it together and see what competencies that person has or that function has and what is needed. So oftentimes when records are scattered in several different areas, it's hard to make sure that all of the records are there, or on the flip side, that that person has gotten all of the training that they need. And again, that's where, and a training matrix is not required. I know I've said it several times, but that's often where that is useful, because you would have all of the competencies that personnel need, and you would have it checked off that they either have it or not. And then in your internal audit, you would be verifying that those records do exist in the areas that you say that they are.
Wonderful. Well, we have not had any additional questions come in. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. There were some really good ones. And a big, big thank you to Melanie for doing the presentation with us here again today. We will be sending out, as we mentioned, this recording. And at this time, we will thank everyone for their time and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yes, thank you very much, Katie, for facilitating.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.